This episode is supported by Manscaped. Manscaped have kindly agreed to continue sponsoring the podcast from the 1st of February to the 28th of February. Between these dates, you can use our promo code GTM to receive 20% off all products and free worldwide shipping. If you've not heard of Manscaped before, they're now the leading company in male grooming. Their products range from face razors to nose trimmers and their famous Lawnmower 3.0, which is a product specifically designed for in and around your nether regions, so you no longer have to worry about snagging the bag. As a listener of Go in the Match, you get 20% off and free worldwide shipping with our promo code GTM. Head over to www.manscaped.com to have a look at all their range of products to grab yourself an absolute bargain. Welcome back to the Go in the Match podcast. Today I'm joined by Martyn Ramsay of Heart and Hand podcast, a dedicated Rangers podcast. Martyn is a massive Rangers fan and also the author of the 50 Greatest Rangers Games. Martyn, thanks for giving me time today, mate, and coming on the podcast.
My pleasure, mate. Thanks for having me on. Great concept for a podcast, especially when none of us can go to the games, and it's probably an ideal opportunity to just reflect on why it's special, and we'll appreciate it when we're eventually allowed back.
That's it. So I want you to take us back to your childhood and following Rangers. Where were you born and how did your love for Rangers Football Club begin?
I was born in Ayrshire, which is probably about 40 miles from Glasgow, and then moved quite quickly up near the city, just out in suburbia, where I've pretty much been ever since, just about 10, 50 miles from the city centre. And like most people, I imagine, they're introduced to the football club by a relative, and probably most commonly a father, and that was no different for me. He had been a Rangers fan all these days, and my grandfather as well. So it was very much a handover, and you were acutely aware early on that this wasn't you weren't just being offered something to spend a Saturday afternoon with. This was something deeper than that, and it was something bigger than that. So I was born in 1980, and my first memory of Rangers was the arrival of Souness in 86. My first game was one of early on in that first Souness season. I was 5 years old. We'll talk about that later, I'm sure. But what that meant was I would be nearly an adult, be 17 and a half years old, before I knew what it felt like to finish a season without winning a trophy. So that's an entire childhood and adolescence and growing up with a lot of joy and sharing that with my dad. It wasn't all plain sailing, a lot of disappointments there as well, especially in Europe. But having that bond, being sat beside each other at Ibrox and all over Scotland and in Europe and wherever else, sharing those ups and downs, sharing those moments of extreme joy and injustice. And it's learning life, isn't it? But to share that with your own man, I think it's pretty special, especially in the west of Scotland, where west of Scotland males perhaps don't or aren't able to communicate with each other, let's say, in the most open way. And there's a bit of adolescent awkwardness as well. But you still had the Rangers, even though you would clash on certain other things as you grew up. You could still have that point of contact, that point of discussion, and that's, I know not everyone has that. We're all introduced to the game in different ways, and our stories are all special to us. But I am so grateful that I was taken along in the first place, but I was just able to share all those experiences with him.
Have you got any sort of memories when you were going as a kid, you'd going to Ibrox for the first time, and who would your sort of heroes been growing up watching Rangers then?
Well, I do remember my first game very vividly. I was only 5 years old, and I'd been badgering my dad because I knew where he went on a Saturday. He had his reservations, mainly that I'd just be bored, the attention span at 5 years old for that. And he was right. I think I probably did say after 10 minutes, is that not it done now? But it was a grey afternoon, September weekend in Scotland. We beat Aberdeen 2-0. Sir Alex Ferguson was still at Aberdeen just. I think he would leave for Manchester United a month later. So, and we won 2-0. Graham Souness scored, and I guess symbolically, looking back at that game, it was quite an appropriate moment. This kind of handing the baton over from for Ferguson disappearing down south, and now there was a very much a new power or an old power that was just resurgent, and that was my team. So instantly, his image was clearly a favourite. Many favourites, Mike, but McCoist, I guess, is who you wanted to be in the playground, because he just always scored, and very infectious personality. You wanted to have that life with its ups and downs and scrapes, because he was, he was just golden balls before that nickname was given to someone else. He would absolutely been the playground hero.
So would then obviously growing up for your teenage years, would going to Ibrox every other Saturday, would that become like a routine thing for you then?
Yeah, but I think between 5 and 11, we would go sporadically whenever we could get tickets, because with the Soonest revival, so did the interest in attendances, because Ibrox had been quite sparse, I think, for about 6-7 years prior to that. A lot of people had become disaffected with the club and certainly the state of the football. Now there was a big resurgence, so getting tickets wasn't completely automatic, but my dad would pick the games, and there'd be some aways in there as well, and a couple of cup finals. But then when I was 11, finally the season ticket arrived for both of us, and that season was 92-93. Rangers won a treble. We were minutes away, I guess, very close to being in that first ever Champions League final. And so this was a whole new experience, going to Ibrox every single home game, but also getting tickets for just about every game that you wanted. I had my first European trip that year as well, to Bruges, obviously in Belgium, in the Champions League. My first year at high school, I think that would have been. So you just felt almost like kind of coming of age. You were just going away, and you were sometimes on a supporters bus, which was new, and you were obviously exposed to a different type of humour and language and whatever else. You just felt you'd already grown up, even though I was only 11, 12. So getting introduced to that side of things was new, and it was just exciting. Right? It was just I felt, I think I appreciated it enough. I could have appreciated it, or you more appreciation as you get older. But I knew that this was good, and it was something really to be part of. You're a fan of a big club. You'll know that some home games are a bit standard, and there's a lot of expectation, and but especially as you grow up, and especially growing up in the time I did, you get to 5 and 6, 7 titles in a row, especially 6 and 7, where they were quite flat years for Rangers. We were not at our best, but we didn't have to be. We'd still win the league because the rest of Celtic were still a shambles. Aberdeen had disappeared. It really was pretty much a walkover. So some of those games could be quite flat, and a bit of sit back and entertain me, because you get to expect that. So not every week is that adrenaline soaked kind of experience, but as a kid growing up, it was. And then you get your Laudrup, and then Gascoigne, who would be my teenage hero, I guess. That someone who just, it's such a cliche, but it was true that when he picked the ball up, you could feel the stands just moving kind of forward, because what's going to happen. And he scored the hat-trick to win that 8th league title in a row. The second goal, it was as if 21 other players didn't matter. They weren't touching him, they weren't getting anywhere near him, they weren't taking the ball off him, and this team game was just reduced to this individual. And he had these problems, and he was hated by just about everyone else in the country. Well, that kind of happens for Rangers players, I guess. So he became even more a hero to me as a 14, 15-year-old. But you identify to that. He's just a boy playing football on the street. He's just doing it in front of 50,000 people.
I think I'm really interested in expanding on when you were going on those European aways when you were still at school. Did you kind of think then that, this is what I want to do, follow Rangers around Europe? And obviously you were so young then. Was it being surrounded by men, the culture, the fan culture, and hearing them all talk about the footy and, you know, being on the booze and, you know, talking about the team and everything and stories that they all have gone to matches. And you kind of just get hooked with that then? Because I kind of think when I started doing aways, like I was hooked by then. And I imagine at such a young age, you were probably like in awe of those fans going, were you?
Yeah, my first trip in Belgium was obviously a midweek game, it was a Wednesday night, so I had day off school out. How I get the day off school, how my mother allowed that to happen, I'm still not entirely sure. But it was a fly out in the morning, fly back straight after the game. And it did feel like you were growing up. And I'd go back into school the next day and couldn't wait to just, you know, regale very jealous friends with these stories. And yeah, you know, listen, you know, Liverpool's European lineage is pretty special. But I'm sure you'll have the same kind of experiences. That Bruges, for example, this beautiful Gothic city, it's now become quite in vogue for whenever we could go for kind of city breaks with loved ones or whatever. It's a beautiful place, just swamped by red, white, and blue, swamped by thousands and thousands of supporters. And I think then it was you're just acutely aware this isn't another club.
Yeah.
There are only a few that do this in these kind of numbers. A few years later, in Munich, playing Bayern Munich, I think we only needed a draw to qualify from the group stage of the Champions League, and we just fell short. We beat 1-0, hit the woodwork 3-4 times. One of those kind of great Scottish glorious failures. But for anyone who remembers the old Olympic stadium in Munich before the Allianz was built, it's a bowl, and you come in very much from the back. And we weren't late, but it wasn't that close to that far from kickoff. Sorry, and just coming in from the top, and 13,000 Rangers supporters in Munich that night with all the flags. And you remember that Olympic Stadium, huge track, right? So the pitch is miles away, and it's just covered by these flags, and there aren't many. Maybe it's a British thing, but there just aren't many clubs that do that. Barcelona, I'm sure there were 20,000 for a group game. Bit of a pilgrimage because it's the first time we'd been to Barcelona, I think, since Rangers had won the Cup Winners' Cup there 30 odd years before. And then obviously we know the UEFA Cup final, and but that was no surprise. I think we got to maybe the last 16, and I was saying to my flatmate at the time, who I sit beside now, if this happens, the entire or half the country is just going to disappear. I mean, it's a kind of case where you could leave your work at early, maybe 2:00 or whatever, and be there for the game. I hope they're prepared for this. I hope they're smart about it, which of course they weren't, and whatever else ensued. But those kind of numbers struck me, Mike, as being something that this just isn't. Not everybody has this, and I'm proud to be part of that, mostly.
What does a standard match day look like for yourself? Obviously, before COVID's happened now, I've never been lucky enough to do Ibrox and, do Rangers away. And it's always something I've always really wanted to do. So for someone that hasn't been, or an away fan coming, what can they sort of expect in and around the ground?
Well, for me now, I mean, I'm 40 now, so I'm getting too old for the. We have it now and again, the whole day sessions, and we'll meet at 11, and you can, if that was what you wanted to do, very, very easy. Ibrox is very close to a huge road called Paisley Road West, which connects, traditionally connected Glasgow to Paisley, the kind of a bigger town just outside, and loads of Rangers pubs on that particular road. So if you did fancy a whole day of it, that would be your starting place, and it would be your final resting place as well, I'm pretty sure. Again, you'll know this. It's dependent very much on the game. If it's just your average Saturday league game, Sunday league game, whenever, there'll be a lot there. I mean, it will be packed. There'll be 50,000 there. it will have its moments. There is a section like most clubs have now of dedicated supporters really trying to drum up that atmosphere. I get that. I'm always a little unsure if it's maybe a wee bit contrived. Atmosphere for me is dependent on the sport. It's dependent on the contest. What's at stake here? Do we expect 3 points? Yes. Well, we'll turn up, we'll cheer the team on, but it doesn't have that electricity. It doesn't have that frisson. Whereas if something's in the balance, if it's an Old Firm game, for example, obviously, or if it's a European night, you know yourself, there's something completely different about that. There's just an electricity around the ground. I am getting old, so I would pick up my cousin, who we have season tickets next to each other. We'll drive, we'll park, a 10-15 minute walk. And it's the walk I quite enjoy, actually. It's coming from the opposite direction, but you just walk towards the main stand. Now, our main stand is, I think, one of the wonders of the football world. It's absolutely stunning. It's an Archibald Leach creation, his stamp on football architecture is well known. And it's stood the test of time. Ibrox, for obvious reasons, was one of the first to fully develop into that all-seater kind of stadium. And part of that does have a bit of an 80s feel to it, because that's when it happened. But the main stand still stands kind of proud, and you take it for granted sometimes, but it does hit you now, especially if it's a sunny day, that this is beautiful. And all of this came out of 4 boys in Kelvin Grove Park saying, why don't we have a football team? It's ridiculous to think of how all of our clubs or most of these clubs have very humble origins, and then they just develop and snowball into something a lot bigger. But if you were doing the trip, I would suggest, if you could possibly get tickets for a European night, you know that there's just something different, especially now. After our absence from that arena, I think we appreciate that a lot more. The manager, although we've seemed to finally crack domestic competition, the European thing was pretty quick. We took to that very well under Gerrard. So we've had a lot of experience out of the past few years, but we appreciate it, and we have done. And most of the games are on an edge, because that's the kind of pitch of the Europa League, really, and where Scottish clubs currently are. So there's something in the sport, something in the contest, and Feyenoord and Porto and Benfica and decent clubs have come to Ibrox and left with very little. So I would suggest that those nights would be something that would impress the neutral. At a regular Saturday, I'm not so sure if it'd be that different. It's a lovely big old stadium. There's a lot of history there, but yeah, there's plenty to enjoy if that's your thing.
So now that you've done your fair share of away days over the years as well, have you got any sort of particular grounds that you've enjoyed going to and experiencing?
In terms of atmosphere, Tynecastle has actually been Hearts aren't in the top flight at the moment, but quite small, quite compact, quite steep, very close to the pitch, and there's always something brewing there. So it's an incredible atmosphere. Listen, going to Parkhead and winning, there's no real, there's nothing much better than that in Scotland, especially as time has gone on and the allocations have reduced. I remember going when, certainly before Parkhead was redeveloped, and it was, again, as a kid who'd only experienced Ibrox, and Ibrox being light years ahead of pretty much anything in Britain at the time in terms of stadium development, especially at something that size. It was like going back 50 years. I mean, this was literally a toilet, but you had 25,000 people, Rangers supporters there. It was just a huge terrace, and so that at a certain age that it's been reduced as time went on. But when you do win there, that makes a fair old noise. It's quite high, and yeah, that's a kind of special one. Pittodrie as well, because the Rangers Aberdeen rivalry when I was growing up was probably bigger, or certainly a few seasons would be bigger than the Old Firm. And going up there in a place that Rangers had not had a lot of success prior to my consciousness of football, going up there and winning, you'd be pelted with coins. I mean, there was always a undertone of violence going on there, but to come away with these, look, the opposite's true. Losing at Parkhead is just the worst. But you know that going in. In terms of just stadiums, the Mestalla at Valencia was blown away by. They know how to deal with away supports, certainly noisy away supports, which is put them in the clouds and be as far away from anything as possible. But what a noise that generated. Villarreal had a certain feel to it as well. Again, very, very steep, and we get a decent result that night. And so maybe that's coloured that experience. Parma enjoyed felt quite British in its size, but there are very few that I would say are, I don't know what you would call soulless now. Hampden, weirdly, is traditionally, years gone by, the Hampden Roar and all that was legendary. They clearly had to redevelop that, and they made a terrible job of it. You feel miles away.
Yeah.
And if it's an Old Firm Cup final, for example, or an Old Firm match at Hampden, you can see there's something happening at the Celtic end. They're jumping about. You can't hear it really. There's a real acoustic problem there that doesn't really lend itself to a brilliant atmosphere. So maybe that's one that doesn't really do what you feel it should do in the tin.
So I think most people are aware that in 2012 the football club obviously officially entered the administration. That obviously resulted in the club going down the leagues, and I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that time and that period and how tough that really was as a fan.
It's trauma. That's what it is. It's trauma, and I think the Rangers support kind of reacted the way that people do to trauma. There's a bit of denial. Yeah. There was a hashtag in that first season. We were in the 3rd division, 4th tier of Scottish football, on Twitter. This is fun, and there's a lot of thousands of punters went back. You get 40,000 at a 4th tier game. For a variety of reasons. Obviously wanted to show the club's support in a kind of darkest hour kind of thing. But there was a lot of kind of belligerence, and we'll show you kind of about it. But this hashtag, this is fun. It wasn't. It was as far from fun as I could possibly imagine, and going to grounds where the ball could get stuck in a hedge. That's all fun and good in the early rounds of the Scottish Cup, for example, because that's what domestic cup competitions are there for. That's what we call the romance of the cup. But that is part of your bread and butter, isn't. And it was traumatic. But it has led to an appreciation of what you have, especially someone my age, as I said, that grew up. There'll be even Laudrup and Gascoigne, right? This is brilliant, but there'll be more, and there'll be better players. Rangers were, for a large part of my childhood, were the biggest club in Britain. They were bigger than United and Liverpool because of understandable reasons of where English football was, and then that changed and overtook us, and we created the Champions League. It was the idea of our club secretary, and I just assumed that we would be part of that club, and then it obviously engulfed us and swallowed us up, and we soon became minnows. So a lot of expectation I grew up with that there would be something next time.
Yeah.
And just appreciating that a lot of what I took for granted shouldn't have been. And when we do get back, that we're going to savour it. And there is no guarantee, as much as these institutions are much beloved or less so, but they're there, that they'll always be there. And there's no guarantee that your club will always be there just because it has over 100 years of incredible history or whatever. And that's really, I guess, what we took out of it. But I know my friends, they went on a bit of a kind of world tour of Scotland, I guess, and they ticked off grounds that they had never dreamed of going. So I think there's only one professional ground that my my friend hasn't been to in Scotland because it was too small. The Rangers game got moved, so there's a bit of gallows humour about it, of course, but yeah, it was far from easy. Even when we got back, actually, because that was the thing about being away for 4 years. Okay, we might draw Celtic in the Cup, and it only happened twice. We lost one, it was only 2-0. Fears of serious cricket scores going into that because we were not in a good place. And the other Cup game, we won on penalties, and it was an incredible afternoon, whilst being in the lower leagues. But unless you drew these clubs that you were historically rivals with, that's the only time you had to really kind of worry. You weren't in the same division as them, so therefore you weren't pegged week by week to what they did. So really the trauma in a way only really started once we come back up, because now, well, your stock's pegged to Celtics every single week, and they are miles away structurally in terms of the finances that they have, in terms of the players that are already there, the winning mentality that's already there. So in a way, our return to the top flight created a new problem. So it's been a horrible decade, but like everything else, you just appreciate what you once had. And as we speak in mid-Feb 2021, we are certainly going to appreciate which is hopefully just around the corner.
So obviously touching on better times now, obviously massive red myself, and obviously I always keep an eye on how Stevie G's doing at Rangers, and obviously I made up for him how well it's gone, and obviously there's potential that he could be our manager in the future. I think that's obviously, it's well publicised, that's his dream. But I don't think it's any secret that he might have to go away and get some more experience elsewhere after Rangers, maybe, if he wanted to manage us. But in your own words, as a Rangers fan, having Gerrard at the helm for a couple of years now, what would you say is like his biggest strength as a manager, or maybe something that surprised you that you wouldn't have expected when he came in?
I remember the day that it was announced, and in our podcast we had a reaction pod, so everyone involved was asked for their thoughts on it. And I had hopes and fears, and my one hope has been, I think, realised. Some clubs just need a coach, and that's fine. My club, your club, need coaches in the staff, but they need a boss.
Yeah.
And it's almost like being prime minister. It is bigger than what can be done in the training ground and what's said before a particular game. We're talking about institutions here, and plenty have been in that job, and it's just been far too big for them. But because you're talking about a megastar of football, I was always confident that he could fill the blazer, to put it like that he's just a big enough personality to do that, and he has.
Yeah.
My big concern, and it's a concern about any superstar footballer that turns to manager, that success rate isn't particularly great, because they cannot understand why mere mortals can't do the things that they could, either in terms of natural ability, or they can't understand why people with talent are not pushing themselves to the levels that they did, don't have the hunger that they did. So they fall out. It just doesn't work. They can't get in the heads of players of that level. And how many disasters have you seen where just these incredible players just can't do this job? It's a completely different skill set. So I was worried about that, and there have been moments. We're talking about his third season here, and certainly domestically. And let's not forget, we've got 7 domestic trophies that have passed them by since being here. We are well on course to finally doing it, and the one that we want, obviously, is the league. But he's had to learn, and especially his post-match interviews, which were always a bit of a concern to me. He still seemed like the Liverpool captain, as if the sweat was still pouring off him. And you'll remember better than me, but always brutally honest as a captain. You can't do that as a manager. You can't, and sometimes he'd be too emotional. He'd be praising players with words that, well, even I knew that's not realistic, and he would throw them under the bus because it was just too emotive. And the incredible story of this title that's 4 wins away is in March 2020, just before Corona hit. he was done. He was toast. We knocked out the cup again, miles behind Celtic after getting in a great position twice at New Year before we have we had a winter break, and we just collapsed. And here it was again. And Mike, I wasn't calling for his head. I don't think many of our podders were. Some fans were because fans are emotive. But I did feel it's only going one way.
Yeah.
What he's done in that break, in that time to reset, has been incredible. Our season this year has been incredible. 1 defeat, an annoying one in the cup, 4 league draws, undefeated in Europe, 1 in a group. Something's dropped, or a few pennies have dropped, but you see him just far more composed, far more detached when he speaks. And it's just this less emotive, up and down, flaky performance that we sometimes saw. And I think that's been huge. And so there you have a willingness to learn and a willingness to allow his staff to do their job. Michael Beale's role, for example, is really important. And I think Gerrard allows him the license to do that job. And that's a big thing in management as well, just knowing what your role is. And at a club at Liverpool, similar to this, is much wider than a particular selection, a particular formation in any given day.
So obviously you just touched on there at the time of recording, 4 more wins and then obviously the title is yours. You know, as we're aware, Celtic have obviously gone on this insane run of winning the 9 titles and, you know, seemingly it looks like Gerrard and this Rangers team are going to put an end to that. You know, in your own words then, how much of a massive achievement has this season been, and like how much of an obsession has it been, do you think, for Gerrard to just, because I remember listening to a podcast that he did with Carragher, The Greatest Games, and he had Gerrard on, and he asked him about, you know, Rangers and Celtic and Scottish football in general, and he says that how much of an obsession has it been to get that title, and it wasn't even from the Rangers fan base of us, you know, get us into Europe or anything. It was stop that. How much of a massive achievement has then been?
Listen, whoever won 55, it'll be our 55th title, what was always going to be legendary. We would have liked to stop the 9 because it's something that we share. Celtic have done it, or had done it once. Rangers have done it once. You could say Celtic won 8 and were awarded a 9th because that season was not completed in very dubious circumstances. But neither have managed to get that 10. And again, when I was growing up, that was get the 9. Yeah. And listen, Walter Smith, hugely successful Rangers manager, took on from Souness after winning that 8th title. We won a double, but he knew if he failed the next year, all this would account for nothing. We had to match it. Once we matched it, right, let's hopefully do. We just ran out of steam and players too old grow together, kind of thing. So the 10 has been a big thing in Scotland. A huge thing for Celtic because their original one, ours in the 90s, it grew organically. People were only talking about it. Certainly ours were only talking about it once 5 was done, and the rest of Scottish football being the way it is. They said, look, Rangers could match this here and could beat it. Once we went down to the bottom in 2012, Celtic fans have been talking about 10 from then. Yeah, because they saw a clear road to that. Rangers will be out the picture for a while. Even when they come back, they'll still be rebuilding, restructuring. We have got this sewn up. And the same's true. Let no one tell you any different. For them to fail at this renders everything that's gone before it not quite meaningless, but close as, because this was it. This was the whole thing. So clearly, that's how rivalry works, right? As much as we hate to admit it, it's a double-edged sword. And yes, we needed to stop that. We needed to get 55 for our own thing. We needed to be back where we believe we belong, which is at the top of Scottish football. And if that knocked that out, that sequence out, then all the more. I think it's matched Gerrard's own obsession, which I understand to be true, to win a title. Something famously that he never managed as a player, and even more famously was kind of deemed to be complicit in that particular failure in 14. So I know that there's an absolute burning desire to do that as a manager. So there's a marriage there, a marriage of obsessions. And as I said, whenever that happened, it would be much venerated by the Rangers support, and every one of those players would be heroes forever. But I still think the way this particular story has gone is one of the most remarkable in the club's history, just because 12 months ago we looked miles away from it because there was a failure there. And what they've done this summer and get into this season has been it's been ridiculous, and that's the story. So yeah, a marriage of obsessions, I think, would be the best way to describe it.
Bit of a random one, but I was quite interested in getting your thoughts on this. There's always a lot of talk, of how the likes of Rangers and Celtic would get on in the Premier League, if the SPL filtered into the English leagues. What's your sort of thoughts on that? And do you think that would be something good for Scottish football or not so much?
My thoughts are that it's purely academic. It's the kind of thing that comes up in pub conversations, and it was more than pub conversation once upon a time. It was talked about in the early 90s, I think, semi-seriously, but it's not. I don't think it's a thing anymore. If it did happen, it would benefit Rangers and Celtic for sure. Scottish football would wither. I think it's fair to say, and without its only kind of money earners, its only points of interest, really. I mean, it is a thought experiment. It is just a kind of academic discussion. But Rangers Celtic, huge clubs with big pool. It's like we use a different currency up here. We can't, or we can no longer, because of the way that the European game has developed, that it's based on TV revenue, TV markets, and Scotland doesn't have the same as yours. Therefore, both Rangers and Celtic can't really maximise that potential in terms of the size of the club. That would obviously change in England. But the fan base for both would have to recalibrate a lot, because Rangers' thing, for example, is success. That's no one's won a league title more than us, more trophies, blah, blah, blah. We're a title winning machine going back the nearly 150 years. So I think those expectations would be interesting to see those kind of recalibrated, because you could not expect to be the one of the two clubs fighting for the league title anymore. Staying up, I think, in those first few seasons would be seen as a success. So that would be different, but it's purely academic. It's not going to happen. That ship has sailed. I guess the way that European football is looking to be structured, it's going to end up, isn't it, with kind of four leagues, really. Probably, and I can see the draw to that. I can see the logic, and it's about, certainly from us, making a stamp in Europe again, because the world's getting smaller. So yeah, you want to compete against better teams more regularly. Go back to that point about atmosphere changing. You want that every week. Yeah. You want a contest that matters, not one that it's a pretty much given before you even turn up.
So obviously you produce content yourself through Hand and Heart podcast as well, and you also wrote a book, the 50 Greatest Rangers Games too. Are both these sort of things something you've always wanted to do, or how did you get into doing both of these things?
I always wanted to write a book from teenage years, I guess, and certainly one on Rangers. The podcast came first. Heart and Hand's been going nearly 10 years, over 10 years now. And I've been a listener for that time. It made the move to Patreon in 2017, I think, and I subscribed and I was listening, and they started releasing more shows on that basis, because they could. And I was listening to a particular show on Rangers history, and this acute mixed feelings of, this is really good, this is right up my street, but also I could do that, and why am I not doing that? And David Edgar, the show's creator and boss, had put out a call for show ideas, and I pitched them a couple, and the rest is history. My main show, is about specific games, and I speak to a fan that was there, and we go back, revisit the game, maybe reassess the game. Was it as good as we remembered? Why didn't it lead to this? Why did it lead to that? What are your memories of it and experiences? We'll look at what's in the news and the charts and whatever else. so that's my show. So I eventually thought the idea, well, I've done a lot of work on these. I wonder if we had a poll amongst the listeners, if they could vote for their greatest Rangers games, we get some good shows out of that, which we did one Christmas, running down the top 50, and I'll produce a book. And the publishers liked the idea, and away we went. So yeah, it's out of date already, but I'm happy about that. It was only ever to be a kind of snapshot of history at that time of Rangers fans voting, which was the summer of 2019 as it happened. And it's more about trying to understand why the resonance of some games, why some haven't made the list at all, why some way ahead, why some maybe unexpectedly lower on that list. And it was really, really interesting. A power of work, but yeah, I'm pretty proud of it. I'm just starting work on my second now, which is looking at that period of my youth, that 86 to 98, and reassessing how that period and try to explain how it happened the way that it did, because we fool ourselves into thinking that success, when you get these runs of trophies, it's inevitable. Nothing's inevitable. And trying to understand why it happened the way that it did.
Fantastic. So finally, the podcast is centered around going the match. So of every podcast we're doing, I want to end by asking, what are your top 3 favourite matches you've either been to or seen?
2 Europeans in an old film. I think that's probably the best way to do it. Rangers played Marseille in a pre-season friendly at the start of 92-93, and they wiped the floor. It was only 2-1, but they were just a different class. So when we drew them in that first ever Champions League group, first ever match of the Champions League, we'd beaten Leeds United to get there, of course, that famous Battle of Britain thing. And Marseille came to Ibrox. Filthy weather. It was horrendous. Rangers' big injuries, as always, seem to be the case in European games. And they were 2-0 up after an hour. Just even in that pitch, moving the ball like nothing else. Deschamps and Bowley and Voller and Boksic, players just about to define the 90s, other players that just, kind of come at the end, but it was just this incredible. Barthez was in goal, Desai, brilliant team. And we did not have a pulse. We were out of it. Walter Smith made a change, put a young striker up front, but withdrew Ian Durrant back into midfield where he should have been. That young boy, Gary McSwiggan, scored this kind of looping, floaty header to make it 2-1. And then Mark Catley scored an equaliser with 10 minutes to go. And I don't think I'd been thrown about like that at a football match at 11 years old. This notion of just going wild and hugging and kissing strangers and just seeing, we were done. And all of a sudden it's 2-2 and we could win this. The class of Marseille, they didn't just retreat and try and hold out. They went back on the front foot and nearly won, but it finished 2-2. But my God, what did I just experience here? What was I part of as just this kid? And leaving Ibrox, I think we're in this. We could do this. We could get out of this group. We could go to the European Cup final, and it's a hope that kills you, but it's a hope that keeps you going, because you just never know. That'd be one. Another Champions League qualifier in 1999 against Parma. What Rangers were to Scotland, Italian football was to Europe in the 90s. Sheer dominance. No question, no arguments. Just incredible. And that Parma team came to Ibrox with Buffon and Thuram and Cannavaro and Ortega. And they'd just beaten us the year before in the UEFA Cup. And I'd gone to the away leg, and we were in it till half time. We're 1-0 up, but down to 10 men, their class showed. And we just wanted to get back into this Champions League under Dick Advocaat, this new manager. And to draw them was so disheartening. Because you're not going to do it. Beat them 2-0 at Ibrox. Again, and it could have been 4. It was one of those. And just the pride, I guess. The Marseille thing was a dig in, and it was luck, and it was just one of those wild, wonderful nights. But this was a genuine grown-up European performance. And for all the success Rangers had in the 90s, so many European embarrassments.
Yeah.
And all this pride restored. We saw it out. We lost 1-0 in Italy, but we went through. But to beat a team like that, I can pick numerous old firms. My dad went to the time we won the league at Parkhead. There was only one ticket available, and he was not for giving that up. So I didn't go to that one. But that 9 in a row season was utter claustrophobia. It wasn't enjoyable overall. Of course, we got the job done, but it really was tense. And all 4 Old Firm games were like that. But the first one at Parkhead in the November, second Old Firm game of the season, for the first time in my life, really, you're going there, and Celtic were top of the league, and that wasn't really a thing. We would set the pace, and they would try and challenge, but we were always just that bit ahead. But if they won that, there's a lead now, and it was the most breathless game of football I've ever seen. It was 1-0, Rangers won. Brian Laudrup scored in 16 minutes. A shot when no one else would have shot from there. It would take it a bit further, and it was a breakaway, and you'll have an easier shot. It was just one of those first time things. It was an incredible goal, but the end to end stuff. This was when Sky still covered it with respect. Andy Gray and Martin Tyler were the commentators at the game, which was still a big thing in those days. And the director missed chances. He couldn't show replays of chances because the action just wasn't stopping. It was really end to end. Andy Gorham was superb. Gascoigne missed a penalty to put it out of bed. Peter van Vossen, the Dutch player from Ajax, missed the easiest chance. You think Ronnie Rosenthal hitting the bar was a terrible miss? This was 3 yards most. Look it up on YouTube. Awful. And Rangers should have won 3 or 4-0 and hadn't. And this was the first time I'd been to this new refurbished Parkhead. So you're up in the gods. There's fewer of you than normal. It's really loud. Hanging on to this 1-0 lead. And then Richard Gough goes clattering into Simon Donnelly with 5 minutes to go. It's a penalty to Celtic. And that win just kind of been taken away from you. Gorham saves, celebrating even more wildly than the goal. I think it was a fox that ran on the park. We got a breather there. But it was just... It wasn't until we'd been out of the league, and obviously we hadn't really had that much Old Firm experience for a while, and that semi-final that we won on penalties. And I'm trying to think to myself, how did we survive doing this 4 times a season? How do people get out of these games still in one piece? Because you just put your soul and your body through so much just tension. Just you get tightens you up all the way through that. 90 minutes seems like 4 hours, but to go to the Lions Den, to win, and to walk away, but still such an enjoyable game of football. I'd put that in and I think it was the first one I'd gone to just with a friend, not with my dad, so I didn't have to watch my P's and Q's and behave. It was you felt again just this next stage of development as a young boy that you could just be absolutely wild through. It was but I could pick from so many. We're both lucky to have so many of those experiences in the bank.
Definitely. So I think that's a fantastic way to finish the podcast there, mate. So just before you go, just a massive thank you for giving me your time and coming on. I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure, mate. All the best.
If you enjoyed that episode and want to keep notified for future episodes, please make sure you subscribe, follow and share, and of course, leave us a 5-star rating. You can now follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, all at Go in the Match, to keep updated for future episodes and updates on the podcast.